War and Peace, Book 4, Chapter 9, read for LibriVox.org by Eva Harnick. The little princess lay supported by pillows, with a white cap on her head. The pains had just left her. Strands of her black hair lay round her inflamed and perspiring cheeks. Her charming rosy mouth with its downy lip was open, and she was smiling joyfully. Prince Andrew entered and paused facing her at the foot of the sofa on which she was lying. Her glittering eyes, filled with childlike fear and excitement, rested on him without changing their expression. "I love you all, and have done no harm to anyone. Why must I suffer so? Help me," her look seemed to say. She saw her husband, but did not realize the significance of his appearance before her now. Prince Andrew went round the sofa and kissed her forehead. "My darling," he said, a word he had never used to her before. "God is merciful." She looked at him inquiringly and with childlike reproach. "I expected help from you, and I get none from you either," said her eyes. She was not surprised at his having come. She did not realize that he had come. His coming had nothing to do with her sufferings or with their relief. The pangs began again, and Mary Bogdánovna advised Prince Andrew to leave the room. The doctor entered. Prince Andrew went out and, meeting Princess Mary, again joined her. They began talking in whispers, but their talk broke off at every moment. They waited and listened. "Go, dear," said Princess Mary. Prince Andrew went again to his wife and sat waiting in the room next to hers. A woman came from the bedroom with a frightened face and became confused when she saw Prince Andrew. He covered his face with his hands and remained so for some minutes. Piteous, helpless animal moans came through the door. Prince Andrew got up, went to the door and tried to open it. Someone was holding it shut. "You can't come in, you can't!" said a terrified voice from within. He began pacing the room. The screaming ceased, and a few more seconds went by. Then suddenly a terrible shriek, it could not be hers, she could not scream like that, came from the bedroom. Prince Andrew ran to the door, the scream ceased, and he heard the wail of an infant. "What have they taken a baby in there for?" thought Prince Andrew in the first second. A baby? What baby? Why, is there a baby there? Or is the baby born? Then suddenly he realized the joyful significance of that wail. Tears choked him, and leaning his elbows on the windowsill, he began to cry, sobbing like a child. The door opened. The doctor, with his shirt sleeves tucked up, without a coat, pale and with a trembling jaw, came out of the room. Prince Andrew turned to him, but the doctor gave him a bewildered look and passed by without a word. A woman rushed out, and seeing Prince Andrew stop, hesitating on the threshold. He went into his wife's room. She was lying dead, in the same position he had seen her in 5 minutes before, and despite the fixed eyes and the pallor of the cheeks, the same expression was on her charming, childlike face, with its upper lip covered with tiny black hair. "I love you all, and have done no harm to anyone. And what have you done to me?" said her charming, pathetic, dead face. In a corner of the room something red and tiny gave a grunt and squealed in Mary Bogdánovna's trembling white hands. 2 hours later, Prince Andrew, stepping softly, went into his father's room. The old man already knew everything. He was standing close to the door, and as soon as it opened, his rough old arms closed like a vice round his son's neck, and without a word he began to sob like a child. 3 days later the little princess was buried, and Prince Andrew went up the steps to where the coffin stood to give her the farewell kiss. And there in the coffin was the same face, though with closed eyes. "Oh, what have you done to me?" it still seemed to say, and Prince Andrew felt that something gave way in his soul, and that he was guilty of a sin he could neither remedy nor forget. He could not weep. The old man, too, came up and kissed the waxen little hands that lay quietly crossed one on the other on her breast, and to him, too, her face seemed to say, "Oh, what have you done to me, and why?" And at the sight the old man turned angrily away. Another 5 days passed, and then the young Prince Nicholas Andreevich was baptized. The wet nurse supported the coverlet with her, while the priest with a goose feather anointed the boy's little red and wrinkled soles and palms. His grandfather, who was his godfather, trembling and afraid of dropping him, carried the infant round the battered tin font and handed him over to the godmother, Princess Mary. Prince Andrew sat in another room, faint with fear lest the baby should be drowned in the font, and awaited the termination of the ceremony. He looked up joyfully at the baby when the nurse brought it to him, and nodded approval when she told him that the wax with the baby's hair had not sunk in the font, but had floated. End of chapter 9. Recording by Eva Harnick, Ponte Vedra, Florida. War and Peace, Book 4, Chapter 10. Recording for LibriVox.org by Eva Harnick. Rostov's share in Dólokhov's duel with Bezúkhov was hushed up by the efforts of the old count, and instead of being degraded to the ranks as he expected, he was appointed an adjutant to the Governor-General of Moscow. As a result, he could not go to the country with the rest of the family, but was kept all summer in Moscow by his new duties. Dólokhov recovered, and Rostov became very friendly with him during his convalescence. Dólokhov lay ill at his mother, who loved him passionately and tenderly, and old Mary Ivanovna, who had grown fond of Rostov for his friendship to her Fedya, often talked to him about her son. "Yes, Count," she would say, "he is too noble and pure-souled for our present depraved world. No one now loves virtue. It seems like a reproach to everyone. Now tell me, Count, was it right, was it honorable of Bezúkhov? And Fedya, with his noble spirit, loved him and even now never says a word against him. Those pranks in Petersburg when they played some tricks on a policeman, didn't they do it together? And there Bezúkhov got off scot-free, while Fedya had to bear the whole burden on his shoulders. Fancy what he had to go through. It is true he has been reinstated, but how could they fail to do that? I think there were not many such gallant sons of the fatherland out there as he. And now this duel. Have these people no feeling or honor? knowing him to be an only son, to challenge him and shoot so straight. It is well God had mercy on us. And what was it for? Who doesn't have intrigues nowadays? Why, if he was so jealous, as I see things, he should have shown it sooner, but he lets it go on for months. And then to call him out, reckoning on Fedya not fighting because he owed him money. What baseness, what meanness! I know you understand, Fedya, my dear Count. That, believe me, is why I am so fond of you. Few people do understand him. He is such a lofty, heavenly soul. Dólokhov himself, during his convalescence, spoke to Rostóv in a way no one would have expected of him. "I know people consider me a bad man," he said. "Let them. I don't care a straw about anyone but those I love. But those I love so that I would give my life for them, and the others I would throttle if they stood in my way. I have an adored, a priceless mother, and 2 or 3 friends, you among them, and as for the rest, I only care about them in so far as they are harmful or useful. And most of them are harmful, especially the women. Yes, dear boy," he continued, "I have met loving, noble, high-minded men, but I have not yet met any women, countesses or cooks, who were not venal. I have not yet met that divine purity and devotion I look for in women. If I found such a one, I would give my life for her. But those..." And he made a gesture of contempt. "And believe me, if I still value my life, it is only because I still hope to meet such a divine creature who will regenerate, purify, and elevate me. But you don't understand it." "Oh yes, I quite understand," answered Rostóv, who was under his new friend's influence. In the autumn, the Rostóvs returned to Moscow. Early in the winter Denísov also came back and stayed with them. The first half of the winter of 1806, which Nicholas Rostóv spent in Moscow, was one of the happiest, merriest times for him and the whole family. Nicholas brought many young men to his parents' house. Véra was a handsome girl of 20, Sónya a girl of 16 with all the charm of an opening flower. Natásha, half grown up and half child, was now childishly amusing, now girlishly enchanting. At that time in the Rostóvs' house there prevailed an amorous atmosphere characteristic of homes where there are very young and very charming girls. Every young man who came to the house, seeing those impressionable smiling young faces, smiling probably at their own happiness, feeling the eager bustle around him, and hearing the fitful bursts of song and music, and the inconsequent but friendly prattle of young girls ready for anything and full of hope, experienced the same feeling, sharing with the young folk of the Rostóvs' household a readiness to fall in love and an expectation of happiness. Among the young men introduced by Rostóv, one of the first was Dólokhov, whom everyone in the house liked except Natásha. She almost quarreled with her brother about him. She insisted that he was a bad man, and that in the duel with Bezúkhov, Pierre was right and Dólokhov wrong, and further that he was disagreeable and unnatural. "There is nothing for me to understand," cried out with resolute self-will. "He is wicked and heartless. There now! I like your Denísov, though he is a rake and all that, still I like him. So you see, I do understand. I don't know how to put it. With this one, everything is calculated, and I don't like that. But Denísov? Oh, Denísov is quite different, replied Nicholas, implying that even Denísov was nothing compared to Dólokhov. You must understand what a soul there is in Dólokhov. You should see him with his mother. What a heart! Well, I don't know about that, but I am uncomfortable with him. And do you know, he has fallen in love with Sónya? What nonsense! I'm certain of it. You will see. Natásha's prediction proved true. Dólokhov, who did not usually care for the society of ladies, began to come often to the house, and the question for whose sake he came, though no one spoke of it, was soon settled. He came because of Sónya, and Sónya, though she would never have dared to say so, knew it and blushed scarlet every time Dólokhov appeared. Dólokhov often dined at the Rostóvs, never missed a performance at which they were present, and went to Iogel's balls for young people which the Rostóvs always attended. He was pointedly attentive to Sónya, and looked at her in such a way that not only could she not bear his glances without coloring, but even the old countess and Natásha blushed when they saw his looks. It was evident that this strange, strong man was under the irresistible influence of the dark, graceful girl who loved another. Rostóv noticed something new in Dólokhov's relations with Sónya, but he did not explain to himself what these new relations were. "They are always in love with someone," he thought of Sónya and Natásha. But he was not as much at ease with Sónya and Dólokhov as before, and was less frequently at home. In the autumn of 1806 everybody had again begun talking of the war with Napoleon with even greater warmth than the year before. Orders were given to raise recruits, 10 men in every 1,000 for the regular army, and beside this 9 men in every 1,000 for the militia. Everywhere Bonaparte was anathematized, and in Moscow nothing but the coming war was talked of. For the Rostov family the whole interest of these preparations for war lay in the fact that Nicholas would not hear of remaining in Moscow, and only awaited the termination of Denísov's furlough after Christmas to return with him to their regiment. His approaching departure did not prevent his amusing himself, but rather gave zest to his pleasures. He spent the greater part of his time away from home at dinners, parties, and balls. End of chapter 10. Recording by Eva Harnick, Ponte Vedra, Florida. War and Peace, Book 4, Chapter 11. Read for LibriVox.org by Eva Harnick. On the 3rd day after Christmas, Nicholas dined at home, a thing he had rarely done of late. It was a grand farewell dinner, as he and Denísov were leaving to join their regiment after Epiphany. About 20 people were present, including Dólokhov and Denísov. Never had love been so much in the air, and never had that amorous atmosphere made itself so strongly felt in the Rostóvs' house as at this holiday time. Seize the moments of happiness, love and be loved. That is the only reality in the world, all else is folly. It is the one thing we are interested in here, said the spirit of the place. Nicholas, Having as usual exhausted 2 pairs of horses, without visiting all the places he meant to go to and where he had been invited, returned home just before dinner. As soon as he entered he noticed and felt the tension of the amorous air in the house, and also noticed a curious embarrassment among some of those present. Sónya Dólokhov and the old countess were especially disturbed, and to a lesser degree Natásha. Nicholas understood that something must have happened between Sónya and Dólokhov before dinner, and with the kindly sensitiveness natural to him, was very gentle and wary with them both at dinner. On that same evening there was to be one of the balls that Iogel, the dancing master, gave for his pupils during the holidays. "Nicholas, will you come to Iogel's? Please do," said Natásha. "He asked you, and Vasíli Dmítrich is also going." Asterix explains Vasíli Dmítrich is Denísov. "Where would I not go at the countess's command?" said Denísov, who at the Rostóvs had jocularly assumed the role of Natásha's knight. "I am even ready to dance the pas de châle." "If I have time," answered Nicholas, "but I promised the Akharovs, they have a party." "And you?" he asked Dólokhov, but as soon as he had asked the question he noticed that it should not have been put. "Perhaps," coldly and angrily replied Dólokhov, glancing at Sónya, and scowling he gave Nicholas just such a look as he had given Pierre at the club dinner. There is something up, thought Nicholas, and he was further confirmed in this conclusion by the fact that Dólokhov left immediately after dinner. He called Natásha and asked her what was the matter. "And I was looking for you," said Natásha, running out to him. "I told you, but you wouldn't believe it," she said triumphantly. "He has proposed to Sónya." Little as Nicholas had occupied himself with Sónya of late, something seemed to give way within him at this news. Dólokhov was a suitable and in some respects a brilliant match for the dowerless orphan girl. From the point of view of the old countess and of society, it was out of the question for her to refuse him. And therefore Nicholas's first feeling on hearing the news was one of anger with Sónya. He tried to say, "That's capital. Of course she will forget her childish promises and accept the offer." But before he had time to say it, Natásha began again. "And fancy, she refused him quite definitely," adding after a pause, "she told him she loved another." "Yes, my Sónya could not have done otherwise," thought Nicholas. "Much as Mamma pressed her, she refused, and I know she won't change once she has said." "And Mamma pressed her?" said Nicholas reproachfully. "Yes," said Natásha. "Do you know, Nicholas, don't be angry, but I know you will not marry her. I know, heaven knows how, but I know for certain that you won't marry her." "Now, don't know that at all," said Nicholas. "But I must talk to her. What a darling Sónya is," he added with a smile. "Ah, she is indeed a darling. I will send her to you." And Natásha kissed her brother and ran away. A minute later Sónya came in with a frightened, guilty, and scared look. Nicholas went up to her and kissed her hand. This was the first time since his return that they had talked alone and about their love. "Sophie," he began timidly at first, and then more and more boldly, "if you wish to refuse one who is not only a brilliant and advantageous match, but a splendid, noble fellow, He is my friend." Sónya interrupted him. "I have already refused," she said hurriedly. "If you are refusing for my sake, I am afraid that I—" Sónya again interrupted. She gave him an imploring, frightened look. "Nicholas, don't tell me that," she said. "No, but I must. It may be arrogant of me, but still it is best to say it. If you refuse him on my account, I must tell you the whole truth. I love you, and I think I love you more than anyone else." "That is enough for me," said Sónya, blushing. "No, but I have been in love 1,000 times and shall fall in love again, though for no one have I such a feeling of friendship, confidence, and love as I have for you. Then I am young. Mamma does not wish it. In a word, I make no promise. And I beg you to consider Dólokhov's offer," he said, articulating his friend's name with difficulty. "Don't say that to me. I want nothing. I love you as a brother, and always shall, and I want nothing more. You are an angel. I am not worthy of you, but I am afraid of misleading you." And Nicholas again kissed her hand. End of chapter 11. Reading by Eva Hanig, Ponte Vedra, Florida. War and Peace, Book 4, Chapter 12. Read for LibriVox.org by Eva Hanig. I.O. girls were the most enjoyable balls in Moscow. So said the mothers as they watched their young people executing their newly learned steps, and so said the youths and maidens themselves as they danced till they were ready to drop, and so said the grown-up young men and women who came to these balls with an air of condescension and found them most enjoyable. That year 2 marriages had come of these balls. The 2 pretty young Princesses Gortschakoff met suitors there and were married, and so further increased the fame of these dances. What distinguished them from others was the absence of host or hostess, and the presence of the good-natured I.O. girl, flying about like a feather and bowing according to the rules of his art, as he collected the tickets from all his visitors. There was the fact that only those came who wished to dance and amuse themselves, as girls of 13 and 14 do, who are wearing long dresses for the first time. With scarcely any exceptions, they all were or seemed to be pretty, so rapturous were their smiles and so sparkling their eyes. Sometimes the best of the pupils, of whom Natásha, who was exceptionally graceful, was first, even danced the pas de chalet, but at this last ball only the écossaise, the anglaise, and the mazurka, which was just coming into fashion, were danced. I.O. girl had taken a ballroom in Bezúkhov's house, and the ball, as everyone said, was a great success. There were many pretty girls, and the Rostov girls were among the prettiest. They were both particularly happy and gay. That evening, proud of Dólokhov's proposal, her refusal, and her explanation with Nicholas, Sónya twirled about before she left home so that the maid could hardly get her hair plaited, and she was transparently radiant with impulsive joy. Natásha, no less proud of her first long dress and of being at a real ball, was even happier. They were both dressed in white muslin with pink ribbons. Natásha fell in love the very moment she entered the ballroom. She was not in love with anyone in particular, but with everyone. Whatever person she happened to look at, she was in love with for that moment. "Oh, how delightful it is!" she kept saying, running up to Sónya. Nicholas and Denísov were walking up and down, looking with kindly patronage at the dancers. "How sweet she is! She will be a real beauty," said Denísov. "Who?" "Countess Natásha," answered Denísov. "And how she dances! What grace!" he said again after a pause. "Who are you talking about?" "About your sister," ejaculated Denísov testily. Rostóv smiled. "My dear Count, you were one of my best pupils. You must dance," said little Iogel, coming up to Nicholas. "Look how many charming young ladies." He turned with the same request to Denísov, who was also a former pupil of his. "No, my dear fellow, I will be a wallflower," said Denísov. "Don't you recollect what bad use I made of your lessons?" "Oh no," said Iogel, hastening to reassure him. "You were only inattentive, but you had talent. Oh yes, you had talent." The band struck up the newly introduced mazurka. Nicholas could not refuse Iogel and asked Sónya to dance. Denísov sat down by the old ladies and, leaning on his saber and beating time with his foot, told them something funny and kept them amused while he watched the young people dancing, Iogel with Natásha, his pride, and his best pupil were the first couple. Noiselessly, skillfully stepping with his little feet in low shoes, Iogel flew first across the hall with Natásha, who, though shy, went on carefully executing her steps. Denísov did not take his eyes off her and beat time with his saber in a way that clearly indicated that if he was not dancing it was because he would not and not because he could not. In the middle of a figure he beckoned to Rostóv, who was passing. "This is not at all the thing," he said. "What sort of Polish mazurka is this? But she does dance splendidly." Knowing that Denísov had a reputation even in Poland for the masterly way in which he danced the mazurka, Nicholas ran up to Natásha. "Go and choose Denísov. He's a real dancer, a wonder," he said. When it came to Natásha's turn to choose a partner, she rose and, tripping rapidly across in her little shoes trimmed with bows, ran timidly to the corner where Denísov sat. She saw that everybody was looking at her and waiting. Nicholas saw that Denísov was refusing, though he smiled delightedly. He ran up to them. "Please, Vasíli Dmítrich," Natásha was saying, "do come." "Oh no, let me off, Countess," Denísov replied. "Now then, Váska," said Nicholas. "They coax me as if I were Váska the cat," said Denísov jokingly. "I will sing for you a whole evening," said Natásha. "Oh, the fairy! She can do anything with me," said Denísov, and he unhooked his saber. He came out from behind the chairs, clasped his partner's hand firmly, threw back his head, and advanced his foot, waiting for the beat. Only on horseback and in the mazurka was Denísov's short stature not noticeable, and he looked the fine fellow he felt himself to be. At the right beat of the music he looked sideways at his partner with a merry and triumphant air, suddenly stamped with one foot, bounded from the floor like a ball, and flew round the room, taking his partner with him. He glided silently on one foot half across the room, and seeming not to notice the chairs, was dashing straight at them, when suddenly, clinking his spurs and spreading out his legs, he stopped short on his heels, stood so a second, stamped on the spot, clanking his spurs, whirled rapidly round, and, striking his left heel against his right, flew round again in a circle. Natásha guessed what he meant to do, and, abandoning herself to him, followed his lead, hardly knowing how. First he spun her round, holding her now with his left, now with his right hand. Then, falling on one knee, he twirled her round him, and again jumping up, dashed so impetuously forward that it seemed as if he would rush through the whole suite of rooms without drawing breath, and then he suddenly stopped and performed some new and unexpected steps. When at last, smartly whirling his partner round in front of her chair, he drew up with a click of his spurs and bowed to her, Natásha did not even make him a curtsy. She fixed her eyes on him in amazement, smiling as if she did not recognize him. "What does this mean?" she brought out. Although Iogel did not acknowledge this to be the real mazurka, everyone was delighted with Denísov's skill. He was asked again and again as a partner, and the old man began smilingly to talk about Poland and the good old days. Denísov, flushed after the mazurka and mopping himself with his handkerchief, sat down by Natásha and did not leave her for the rest of the evening. End of chapter 12. Recording by Eva Harnick, Ponte Vedra, Florida. War and Peace, Book 4, Chapter 13. Recording for LibriVox.org by Eva Harnick. For 2 days after that, Rostóv did not see Dólokhov at his own or at Dólokhov's home. On the 3rd day he received a note from him. "As I do not intend to be at your house again for reasons you know of, and I am going to rejoin my regiment, I am giving a farewell supper tonight to my friends. Come to the English Hotel." About 10 o'clock Rostóv went to the English Hotel straight from the theater, where he had been with his family and Denísov. He was at once shown to the best room, which Dólokhov had taken for that evening. Some 20 men were gathered round the table, at which Dólokhov sat between 2 candles. On the table was a pile of gold and paper money, and he was keeping the bank. Rostóv had not seen him since his proposal and Sónya's refusal, and felt uncomfortable at the thought of how they would meet. Dólokhov's clear, cold glance met Rostóv as soon as he entered the door, as though he had long expected him. "It is a long time since we met," he said. "Thanks for coming. I will just finish dealing, and then Ilyúshka will come with his chorus." "I called once or twice at your house," said Rostóv, reddening. Dólokhov made no reply. "You may punt," he said. Rostóv recalled at that moment a strange conversation he had once had with Dólokhov. "None but fools trust to luck in play," Dólokhov had then said. "Or are you afraid to play with me?" Dólokhov now asked, as if guessing Rostóv's thought. Beneath his smile Rostóv saw in him the mood he had shown at the club dinner and at other times when, as if tired of everyday life, he had felt a need to escape from it by some strange and usually cruel action. Rostóv felt ill at ease. He tried but failed to find some joke with which to reply to Dólokhov's words. But before he had thought of anything, Dólokhov, looking straight in his face, said slowly and deliberately so that everyone could hear, "Do you remember we had a talk about cards? He's a fool who trusts to luck. One should make certain, and I want to try." To try his luck or the certainty? Rostóv asked himself. "Well, you should better not play," Dólokhov added, and springing a new pack of cards said, "Bank, gentlemen." Moving the money forward, he prepared to deal. Rostóv sat down by his side and at first did not play. Dólokhov kept glancing at him. "Why don't you play?" he asked. And strange to say, Nicholas felt that he could not help taking up a card, putting a small stake on it, and beginning to play. "I have no money with me," he said. "I will trust you." Rostóv staked 5 rubles on a card and lost. Staked again and again lost. Dólokhov killed, that is, beat 10 cards of Rostóv's running. "Gentlemen," said Dólokhov after he had dealt for some time, "please place your money on the cards, or I may get muddled in the reckoning." One of the players said he hoped he might be trusted. "Yes, you might, but I am afraid of getting the accounts mixed, so I ask you to put the money on your cards," replied Dólokhov. "Don't stint yourself. We will settle afterwards," he added, turning to Rostóv. The game continued. A waiter kept handing round champagne. All Rostóv's cards were beaten and he had 800 rubles scored up against him. He wrote 800 rubles on a card, but while the waiter filled his glass, he changed his mind and altered it to his usual stake of 20 rubles. "Leave it," said Dólokhov, though he did not seem to be even looking at Rostóv. "You will win it back all the sooner. I lose to the others but win from you. Or are you afraid of me?" he asked again. Rostóv submitted. He let the 800 remain and laid down a 7 of hearts with a torn corner which he had picked up from the floor. He well remembered that 7 afterwards. He laid down the 7 of hearts on which with a broken bit of chalk he had written 800 rubles in clear upright figures. He emptied the glass of warm champagne that was handed him, smiled at Dólokhov's words, and with a sinking heart, waiting for a 7 to turn up, gazed at Dólokhov's hands which held the pack. Much depended on Rostóv's winning or losing on that 7 of hearts. On the previous Sunday the old count had given his son 2000 rubles, and though he always disliked speaking of money difficulties, had told Nicholas that this was all he could let him have till May, and asked him to be more economical this time. Nicholas had replied that it would be more than enough for him and that he gave his word of honor not to take anything more till the spring. Now only 1200 rubles was left of that money, so that this 7 of hearts meant for him not only the loss of 1600 rubles, but the necessity of going back on his word. With a thinking heart he watched Dólokhov's hands and thought, "Now then, make haste and let me have this card, and I will take my cab and drive home to supper with Denísov, Natásha, and Sónya, and will certainly never touch a card again." At that moment his home life, jokes with Pétya, talks with Sónya, duets with Natásha, piquet with his father, and even his comfortable bed in the house on the Povarskaya rose before him with such vividness, clearness, and charm that it seemed as if it were all a lost and unappreciated bliss long past. He could not conceive that a stupid chance, letting the 7 be dealt to the right rather than to the left, might deprive him of all this happiness newly appreciated and newly illumined, and plunge him into the depths of unknown and undefined misery. That could not be, yet he awaited with a sinking heart the movement of Dólokhov's hands. Those broad reddish hands, with hairy wrists visible from under the shirt cuffs, laid down the pack and took up a glass and a pipe that were handed him. "So you are not afraid to play with me?" repeated Dólokhov, and as if about to tell a good story, he put down the cards, leaned back in his chair, and began deliberately with a smile. "Yes, gentlemen, I have been told there is a rumor going about Moscow that I am a sharper, so I advise you to be careful." "Come now, deal!" exclaimed Rostóv. "Oh, those Moscow gossips!" said Dólokhov, and he took up the cards with a smile. "Ah!" Rostóv almost screamed, lifting both hands to his head. The 7 he needed was lying uppermost, the first card in the pack. He had lost more than he could pay. "Still, don't ruin yourself," said Dólokhov with a side glance at Rostóv as he continued to deal. End of chapter 13. Recording by Eva Hanik, Pontevedra, Florida. War and Peace, Book 4, Chapter 14. Recording for LibriVox.org by Eva Hanik. An hour and a half later, most of the players were but little interested in their own play. The whole interest was concentrated on Rostóv. Instead of 1,600 rubles he had a long column of figures scored against him, which he had reckoned up to 10,000, but that now, as he vaguely supposed, must have risen to 15,000. In reality it already exceeded 20,000 rubles. Dólokhov was no longer listening to stories or telling them, but followed every movement of Rostóv's hands and occasionally ran his eyes over the score against him. He had decided to play until that score reached 43,000. He had fixed on that number because 43 was the sum of his and Sónya's joint ages. Rostóv, leaning his head on both hands, sat at the table, which was scrawled over with figures, wet with spilled wine, and littered with cards. One tormenting impression did not leave him, that those broad-boned reddish hands with hairy wrists visible from under the shirt sleeves, those hands which he loved and hated, held him in their power. 600 rubles, ace, a corner, a 9. Winning it back is impossible. Oh, how pleasant it was at home. The knave, double or quits. It can't be. And why is he doing this to me? Rostóv pondered. Sometimes he staked a large sum, but Dólokhov refused to accept it and fixed the stake himself. Nicholas submitted to him, and at one moment prayed to God, as he had done on the battlefield at the bridge over the Enns, and then guessed that the card that came first to hand from the crumpled heap under the table would save him, now counted the cords on his coat and took a card with that number and tried staking the total of his losses on it. Then he looked round for aid from the other players, or peered at the now cold face of Dólokhov and tried to read what was passing in his mind. He knows, of course, what this loss means to me. He can't want my ruin. Wasn't he my friend? Wasn't I fond of him? But it is not his fault. What is he to do if he has such luck? And it is not my fault either, he thought to himself. I have done nothing wrong. Have I killed anyone, or insulted or wished harm to anyone? Why such a terrible misfortune? And when did it begin? Such a little while ago I came to this table with the thought of winning 100 rubles to buy that casket for Mamma's name day, and then going home. I was so happy, so free, so light-hearted, and I did not realize how happy I was. When did that end, and when did this new terrible state of things begin? What marked the change? I sat all the time in this same place at this table, chose and placed cards, and watched those broad-boned, agile hands in the same way. When did it happen, and what has happened? I am well and strong, and still the same, and in the same place. No, it can't be. Surely it will all end in nothing. He was flushed and bathed in perspiration, though the room was not hot. His face was terrible and piteous to see, especially from its helpless efforts to seem calm. The score against him reached the fateful sum of 43,000. Rostóv had just prepared a card, by bending the corner of which he meant to double the 3,000 just put down to his score, when Dólokhov, slamming down the pack of cards, put it aside and began rapidly adding up the total of Rostóv's debt, breaking the chalk as he marked the figures in his clear, bold hand. Supper! It is time for supper, and here are the gypsies. Some swarthy men and women were really entering from the cold outside and saying something in their gypsy accents. Nicholas understood that it was all over, but he said in an indifferent tone, "Well, won't you go on? I had a splendid card all ready," as if it were the fun of the game which interested him most. "It is all up. I am lost," thought he. "Now a bullet through my brain, that is all that is left me." And at the same time he said in a cheerful voice, "Come now, just this one more little card." "All right," said Dólokhov, having finished the addition. "All right. 21 rubles," he said, pointing to the figure 21, by which the total exceeded the round sum of 43,000. And, taking up a pack, he prepared to deal. Rostóv submissively unbent the corner of his card, and instead of the 6,000 he had intended, carefully wrote 21. "It's all the same to me," he said. "I only want to see whether you will let me win this then or beat it." Dólokhov began to deal seriously. Oh, how Rostóv detested at that moment those hands with their short reddish fingers and hairy wrists, which held him in their power. The 10 fell to him. "You owe 43,000, Count," said Dólokhov, and stretching himself he rose from the table. "One does get tired sitting so long," he added. "Yes, I am tired too," said Rostóv. Dólokhov cut him short as if to remind him that it was not for him to jest. "When am I to receive the money, Count?" Rostóv, flushing, drew Dólokhov into the next room. "I cannot pay it all immediately. Will you take an IOU?" he said. "I say, Rostóv," said Dólokhov clearly, smiling and looking Nicholas straight in the eyes, "you know the saying, lucky in love, unlucky at cards. Your cousin is in love with you, I know." "Oh, it is terrible to feel oneself so in this man's power," thought Rostóv. He knew what a shock he would inflict on his father and mother by the news of this loss, he knew what a relief it would be to escape it all, and felt that Dólokhov knew that he could save him from all this shame and sorrow, but wanted now to play with him as a cat does with a mouse. "Your cousin..." Dólokhov started to say, but Nicholas interrupted him. "My cousin has nothing to do with this, and it is not necessary to mention her," he exclaimed fiercely. "Then when am I to have it?" "Tomorrow," replied Rostóv and left the room. Chapter 14. Recording by Eva Harnick, Pontevedra, Florida.
Peace, Book 4, Chapter 15. Read for LibriVox.org by Leon Meyer. Chapter 15. To say "tomorrow" and keep up a dignified tone was not difficult, but to go home alone, see his sisters, brother, mother, and father, confess, and ask for money he had no right to after giving his word of honor, was terrible. At home they had not yet gone to bed. The young people, after returning from the theater, had had supper, and were grouped round the clavichord. As soon as Nicholas entered, he was enfolded in that poetic atmosphere of love which pervaded the Rostóv household that winter, and, now after Dólokhov's proposal and Iogel's ball, seemed to have grown thicker round Sónya and Natásha as the air does before a thunderstorm. Sónya and Natásha, in the light blue dresses they had worn at the theater, looking pretty and conscious of it, were standing by the clavichord, happy and smiling. Véra was playing chess with Shinshín in the drawing-room. The old countess, waiting for the return of her husband and son, sat playing patience with the old gentlewoman who lived in their house. Denísov, with sparkling eyes and ruffled hair, sat at the clavichord, striking chords with his short fingers, his legs thrown back and his eyes rolling as he sang, with his small, husky, but true voice, some verses called Enchantress, which he had composed, and to which he was trying to fit music. "Enchantress, say to my forsaken lyre, what magic power is this recalls me still? What spark has set my inmost soul on fire? What is this bliss that makes my fingers thrill?" He was singing in passionate tones, gazing with his sparkling black agate eyes at the frightened and happy Natásha. "Splendid! Excellent!" exclaimed Natásha. "Another verse," she said, without noticing Nicholas. Everything still the same with them, thought Nicholas, glancing into the drawing-room, where he saw Véra and his mother with the old lady. "Ah, and here's Nicholas!" cried Natásha, running up to him. "Is Papa at home?" he asked. "I am so glad you've come," said Natásha, without answering him. "We are enjoying ourselves. Vasíli Dmítrich is staying a day longer for my sake. Did you know?" "No, Papa is not back yet," said Sónya. "Nicholas, have you come? Come here, dear," called the old countess from the drawing-room. Nicholas went to her, kissed her hand, and sitting down silently at her table, began to watch her hands arranging the cards. From the dancing-room they still heard the laughter and merry voices trying to persuade Natásha to sing. All right," shouted Denísov. "It's no good making excuses now. It's your turn to sing the Bacchawala. I entreat you." The countess glanced at her silent son. "What is the matter?" she asked. "Oh, nothing," said he, as if weary of being continually asked the same question. "Will Papa be back soon?" "I expect so." "Everything's the same with them. They know nothing about it. Where am I to go?" thought Nicholas, and went again into the dancing room where the clavichord stood. Sónya was sitting at the clavichord, playing the prelude to Denísov's favorite barcarolle. Natásha was preparing to sing. Denísov was looking at her with enraptured eyes. Nicholas began pacing up and down the room. "Why do they want to make her sing? How can she sing? There's nothing to be happy about," thought he. Sónya struck the first chord of the prelude. "My God, I'm a ruined and dishonored man. A bullet through my brain is the only thing left me, not singing," his thoughts ran on. "Go away? But where to? It's one. Let them sing." He continued to pace the room, looking gloomily at Denísov and the girls and avoiding their eyes. "Nikólenka, what is the matter?" Sónya's eyes fixed on him seemed to ask. She noticed at once that something had happened to him. Nicholas turned away from her. Natásha too, with her quick instinct, had instantly noticed her brother's condition. But though she noticed it, she was herself in such high spirits at that moment, so far from sorrow, sadness, or self-reproach, that she purposely deceived herself, as young people often do. "No, I am too happy now to spoil my enjoyment by sympathy with anyone's sorrow," she felt, and she said to herself, "No, I must be mistaken. He must be feeling happy, just as I am." "Now, Sónya," she said, going to the very middle of the room, where she considered the resonance was best. Having lifted her head and let her arms droop lifelessly, as ballet dancers do, Natásha, rising energetically from her heels to her toes, stepped to the middle of the room and stood still. "Yes, that's me," she seemed to say, answering the rapt gaze with which Denísov followed her. "And what is she so pleased about?" thought Nicholas, looking at his sister. "Why isn't she dull and ashamed?" Natásha took the first note, her throat swelled, her chest rose, her eyes became serious. At that moment she was oblivious of her surroundings, and from her smiling lips flowed sounds which anyone may produce at the same intervals, hold for the same time, but which leave you cold 1,000 times, and the 1,001st time thrill you and make you weep. Natásha that winter had for the first time begun to sing seriously, mainly because Denísov so delighted in her singing. She no longer sang as a child. There was no longer in her singing that comical, childish, painstaking effect that had been in it before. But she did not yet sing well, as all the connoisseurs who heard her said, "It is not trained, but it is a beautiful voice that must be trained." Only they generally said this some time after she had finished singing. While that untrained voice, with its incorrect breathing and labored transitions, was sounding, even the connoisseurs said nothing, but only delighted in it and wished to hear it again. In her voice there was a virginal freshness, an unconsciousness of her own powers, and an as yet untrained velvety softness, which so mingled with her lack of art in singing that it seemed as if nothing in that voice could be altered without spoiling it. "What is this?" thought Nicholas, listening to her with widely opened eyes. "What has happened to her? How she is singing today!" And suddenly the whole world centered for him on anticipation of the next note, the next phrase, and everything in the world was divided into 3 beats. O mio crudele affetto! 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1. O mio crudele affetto! 1, 2, 3. 1. "Oh, this senseless life of ours," thought Nicholas, "all this misery and money and Dólokhov and anger and honor, it's all nonsense, but this is real. Now then, Natásha, now then, dearest, now then, darling. How will she take that sea? She's taken it! Thank God!" And without noticing that he was singing, to strengthen the sea he hung a second, a third below the high note. Ah, God, how fine! Did I really take it? How fortunate, he thought. Oh, how that chord vibrated, and how moved was something that was finest in Rostóv's soul. And this something was apart from everything else in the world, and above everything in the world. What were losses, and Dólokhov, and words of honor? All nonsense. One might kill and rob, and yet be happy. End of chapter 15. Book 4, Chapter 16. Read for LibriVox.org by Leon Meyer. Chapter 16. It was long since Rostóv had felt such enjoyment from music as he did that day. But no sooner had Natásha finished her barcarolle than reality again presented itself. He got up without saying a word and went downstairs to his own room. A quarter of an hour later the old count came in from his club, cheerful and contented. Nicholas, hearing him drive up, went to meet him. "Well, had a good time?" said the old count, smiling gaily and proudly at his son. Nicholas tried to say yes, but could not, and he nearly burst into sobs. The count was lighting his pipe, and did not notice his son's condition. "Ah, it can't be avoided," thought Nicholas, for the first and last time. And suddenly, in the most casual tone, which made him feel ashamed of himself, he said, as if merely asking his father to let him have the carriage to drive to town, "Papa, I have come on a matter of business. I was nearly forgetting. I need some money." "Dear me," said his father, who was in especially good humor, "I told you it would not be enough. How much?" "Very much," said Nicholas, flushing, and with a stupid, careless smile, for which he was long unable to forgive himself. "I have lost a little, I mean a good deal, a great deal, 43,000. "What? To whom? Nonsense!" cried the count, suddenly reddening with an apoplectic flush over neck and nape as old people do. "I promised to pay tomorrow," said Nicholas. "Well!" said the old count, spreading out his arms and sinking helplessly on the sofa. "It can't be helped. It happens to everyone," said the son, with a bold, free, and easy tone, while in his soul he regarded himself as a worthless scoundrel, whose whole life could not atone for his crime. He longed to kiss his father's hands, and kneel to beg his forgiveness, but said, in a careless and even rude voice, that it happens to everyone. The old count cast down his eyes on hearing his son's words, and began bustlingly searching for something. Yes, he muttered. "It will be difficult, I fear, difficult to raise. Happens to everybody. Yes, who has not done it?" And with a furtive glance at his son's face, the count went out of the room. Nicholas had been prepared for resistance, but had not at all expected this. "Papa! Papa!" he called after him, sobbing, "Forgive me!" And, seizing his father's hand, he pressed it to his lips and burst into tears. While father and son were having their explanation, the mother and daughter were having one not less important. Natásha came running to her mother, quite excited. "Mamma, Mamma! He has made me..." "Made what?" "Made me an offer, Mamma! Mamma!" she exclaimed. The countess did not believe her ears. Denísov had proposed. To whom? To this chit of a girl, Natásha, who not so long ago was playing with dolls, and who was still having lessons. "Don't, Natásha! What nonsense!" she said, hoping it was a joke. "Nonsense indeed! I am telling you the fact," said Natásha indignantly. "I come to ask you what to do, and you call it nonsense!" The countess shrugged her shoulders. "If it is true that Monsieur Denísov has made you a proposal, tell him he is a fool, that's all." "No, he is not a fool," replied Natásha indignantly and seriously. "Well then, what do you want? You're all in love nowadays. Well, if you are in love, marry him," said the countess with a laugh of annoyance. "Good luck to you." "No, Mamma, I'm not in love with him. I suppose I'm not in love with him." "Well then, tell him so." "Mamma, are you cross? Don't be cross, dear. Is it my fault?" "No, but what is it, my dear? Do you want me to go and tell him?" said the countess, smiling. "No, I will do it myself. Only tell me what to say. It's all very well for you," with a responsive smile. "You should have seen how he said it. I know he did not mean to say it, but it came out accidentally." "Well, all the same, you must refuse him." "No, I mustn't. I'm so sorry for him. He's so nice." "Well then, accept his offer. It's high time for you to be married," answered the countess sharply and sarcastically. "No, Mamma, but I'm so sorry for him. I don't know how I'm to say it." "And there's nothing for you to say. I shall speak to him myself," said the countess, indignant that they should have dared to treat this little Natásha as grown up. "No, not on any account. I will tell him myself, and you'll listen at the door." And Natásha ran off across the drawing room to the dancing hall, where Denísov was sitting on the same chair by the clavichord with his face in his hands. He jumped up at the sound of her light step. "Natalie," he said, moving with rapid steps toward her, "decide my fate. It is in your hands." "Vasíli Dmítrich, I'm so sorry for you. No, but you are so nice. But it won't do, not that, but as a friend I shall always love you." Denísov bent over her hand and she heard strange sounds she did not understand. She kissed his rough curly black head. At this instant they heard the quick rustle of the countess's dress. She came up to them. "Vasíli Dmítrich, I thank you for the honor," she said, with an embarrassed voice, though it sounded severe to Denísov. "But my daughter is so young, and I thought that, as my son's friend, you would have addressed yourself first to me. In that case you would not have obliged me to give this refusal." "Countess!" said Denísov, with downcast eyes and a guilty face. He tried to say more, but faltered. Natásha could not remain calm, seeing him in such a plight. "Countess, I have done wrong," Denísov went on in an unsteady voice. "But believe me, I so adore your daughter and all your family that I would give my life twice over." He looked at the countess and, seeing her severe face, said, "Well, good-by, Countess," and, kissing her hand, he left the room with quick, resolute strides, without looking at Natásha. Next day saw Denísov off. He did not wish to stay another day in Moscow. All Denísov's Moscow friends gave him a farewell entertainment at the gypsies', with the result that he had no recollection of how he was put in the sleigh or of the first 3 stages of his journey. After Denísov's departure, Nicholas spent another fortnight in Moscow, without going out of the house, waiting for the money his father could not at once raise, and he spent most of his time in the girls' room. Sónya was more tender and devoted to him than ever. It was as if she wanted to show him that his losses were an achievement that made her love him all the more, but Nicholas now considered himself unworthy of her. He filled the girls' albums with verses and music, and having at last sent Dólokhov the whole 43,000 rubles and received his receipt, he left at the end of November, without taking leave of any of his acquaintances, to overtake his regiment, which was already in Poland. End of Chapter 16. End of War and Peace, Book 4, by Leo Tolstoy.